And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oliver Francis here in beautiful East Grand Forks at the Exponent office with Mayor of East Grand Forks, Mayor Steve Gander. We're going to talk about some different things that have gone on since he's taken over since he's taken the position. Mayor, first, just kind of tell us why you decided to get into what led you to get into public service, what you do in the town here outside of being mayor and things like that.
Well, you're taking me back to the days of the election, which were now coming up on 3 years ago. And, I've thought for a long time about serving our country. And I have very few regrets in life, but probably the one regret that I think of is I didn't ever serve in the armed forces, never served in the military. And I talked to a lot of veterans about that and active duty folks in the military. And first of all, they'll say, you know what, we're just doing our job as we serve the country. But they also have said, many of the older ones have said, you'll find other ways to serve. There are so many ways to serve. Certainly you're serving the country right now as you take this report and bring it out to the people. So there's so many ways to serve. And they would give me a challenge, find a way to serve, find a way to give back. And I've really believed that for as long as I can remember. And so when I consider serving as mayor, it is just that. It's a way to give back to this community that I love. I grew up here. It's given me so much education-wise and lots of great memories and good times. And so this is just a way to give back to the community for all that I've received over a lifetime. You had another question tucked in there. Can't remember what it was.
The other question being, what's your what's your non-mayor
Yeah, when
job?
I'm not the mayor. So I'm married. My wife and I, this summer, will be 29 years. We have 2 kids, mostly grown, 23 and 25 years old. The older son is married with 2 kids, so we have 2 grandkids here. So family is very important to me, and I'd have to say, first and foremost, along with being mayor, hopefully doing some justice to being a husband, dad, grandpa, although I'm way too young to be a grandpa, I know that. And then outside of that, though, my career, my day job is as an optometrist. Been over at Opticare, and this year it will be 32 years as an optometrist.
Nicely done. What are some of your favorite things about the community of East Grand Forks? It could be a favorite business, it could be just the attitude of the people, it could be really, really open-ended question here.
I would even, as an example, I would tie back to some of the stories I shared at the State of the City address. And I've enjoyed living here my whole life, but this brings it to clear focus for me. In Chicago, Illinois, which is a fine city, I don't mean to say anything bad about folks from Chicago. Well, maybe I do, a few of them. My first weekend there was a victim of significant criminal activity. Had to run for my life for a few blocks, chased with switchblades and rocks. And what I mean then, and then each year that I lived in Chicago, some sort of criminal activity against myself every single year that I was there. Now you come back here, and certainly even from when I lived here before, public safety is so important to any quality of life, right? So safety from criminal activity, it's foundational to having a good life. I don't care how nice your greenway is, how wonderful your sporting events are, all the other cultural events. If you're not safe, if you have to be on guard for your safety every minute that you go anywhere, that is not a quality of life. And so the very safe life that we have here, and the other part about that kind of safety where we trust each other and don't really have a day-by-day threat of criminal activity, we actually can turn to one another for help. The big blizzard rolls in and there's a power outage, and maybe one person on the block has a generator. Well, we share it to keep our lights on or our sump pumps going or whatever we need. So that ability to actually pull together up here and fight the elements or whatever it may be, that's huge. Really, really nice.
Good to hear. Now let's kind of move more into the day-to-day business of governing and doing the people's business. As a mayor, what are some things that you're proud that your administration has been able to do so far, like big picture?
Yeah. So we had a visioning session in 2017, And it was January of that year, so we're probably about ready to do another one soon, and we're going to talk about that at an upcoming work session. But of our top 10 objectives, and I can't remember them all, but one of them was, for example, bring our financial reserves to target. We weren't terribly close even at that time. Now we're there. We talked about forming a charter commission because our city charter hadn't been looked at in, I think it was 1974 or 6, and it hadn't been looked at. Well, that's the Constitution that guides us. And there have been some smaller changes in like the names of people inside our city and some larger changes as to how we conduct business. And so we began, I should tell you, we've reconstituted the Charter Commission. It's quite a lengthy legal process. You have to go through the courts and you have to nominate people and get the list of names approved, and then you gather and convene with the charter and begin the process of revising it. And you want to make those revisions incremental. I mean, clearly you don't want to get too wild and make some radical swings in your Constitution because it is your foundational document that guides you, which again is our city charter. So we have that committee gathered. They meet monthly. We've been taking out sections of the charter sequentially and working through those and doing very good work, and the kind of good work that we have known as a community that's been needed for probably a decade, and it's happening now, right now. So that's good. We've had a problem with some of our special assessment policies. That was in the top 10, special assessments. We've already fixed it in new subdivisions. That is to say, when streets and curb and water and sewer and water, curb gutter, sewer water, when those all go into a development new, we now have it laid out in the development agreement that those dollars are known and well established before you begin to sell the lots. Used to be the reverse of it. You had all kinds of question marks of what would be the cost to confuse the consumer, and that's not a good thing. Well, the next part of that whole process, as we're looking at special assessments for street projects, is the street replacement. And so on an existing street, our current policy is basically dead. Under the newer Minnesota laws that have come out, we haven't been able to replace a street in our town for a lot of years because our ordinance it doesn't work anymore. It no longer lines up with Minnesota law. Well, we're going to work on that. We've begun to work on that, and I think this year we can get that completed. May not sound like much, but what if you lived along 20th or 5th, and there's another street also that's completely broken up, has been in need of complete replacement for a decade or more, and you can't even hardly get into your driveway without like scraping some part of the undercarriage of your car. It's a big deal to you. And as you live on any other street and say, whoa, what kind of city can't even timely replace their streets? What happens when our street needs replacement? We can do better. We'll get it figured out. One of the top 10 was establish public trust. That's sort of vague and nebulous, but I feel we're well on the way. You know, in something like this where we have an accountability, y'all are just, I don't have any notes. I have no talking points here for something like this, but willing to speak candidly of, look, here's what we're attempting to do, and what do you all think? Give us some feedback. Are we on track for your preferences or not? Among the top 10, we want to put aside funds for the local share of street improvement projects and all other building maintenance. And again, we've made great progress toward identifying funding sources for projects that need to be done before we actually put shovel to soil, instead of trying to figure out how to pay for them after the fact. And South End Neighborhood Bridge is on that list, and I think I'm working hard, and others are too, to try to get that done as soon as we possibly can. So off the top of my head, I think I've named 6 or 7 of the top 10 from the 2017 planning breakout that we did, and all of them are either completed or in the hopper toward completion. I feel good about that.
Good, and that's absolutely wonderful to hear. Going forward, I know that Minnesota State, their general session and the short special session just wrapped up. What are some impacts from that session citizens of East Grand Forks should look for, especially when it comes to things like LGA and the city getting money through the border cities economic development program?
Looks like we got a favorable outcome on the border cities legislation. We're not only looking for good allocations, but we're also looking to make it permanent. And while we got good allocation for this year, I think we still have a ways to go to try to get that locked in as a permanent thing going forward. So a good news is it's going to be funded, and we're hopeful still to see in the near future, probably in the next year or two, to make it a little more solid as it goes. So that first hurdle of getting this upcoming round funded is in place. LGA, once again, we didn't see really decisive action on LGA. We worked hard to get some wording in there to the unique circumstance that we have post-flood. We had like a 4-year fix put in from the House in the House Budget Committee, and it actually cleared the whole House. But in the reconciliation with with the full complete House, we did get approval, and yet when it came to be reconciled with the Senate, they could not agree, and it got kicked right out. What we did get is an additional appropriation for LGA of somewhere upwards of 30 million, I think, but that won't really help us much because in the current formula, our annual LGA disbursement is going down by $80,000 to $90,000 a year. However, they did agree in a legislative effort right now that no city will drop for the year 2020. So at least we've been seeing about an 80 to 90,000 drop in consecutive years, and we were projected to have that again, at least as a little stopgap. We won't have that additional loss for 2020.
Good to hear. Going forward, what are some potential opportunities that the city has, especially when it comes to things like, could you maybe give us an update on the progress of where the governor's fishing opener bid is at, and also any conversations that you or other city officials may have had, early conversations, obviously, about Hockey Day Minnesota, and where those things are, and what citizens should maybe be looking for when it comes to each of them?
So, first of all, I would talk about the Minnesota Governor's Fishing Opener in the year 2021.
Yes.
And yesterday, actually, we had Explore Minnesota Tourism representative here for a site visit. Went very well. Initially, we had a meal, and even before that, a city tour, a PowerPoint from her, and then just a back and forth session. She had a million questions. And then on a lovely cloudless day, we took her out on the river and fished catfish for a couple hours and got 3 nice monster cats. She loved the shoreline of our river. She said every other place that she's been, the shoreline is like 100% developed on both sides, and here we have like wilderness within a half mile of your city or even running through your city. And of course the ducks coming off the river, running parallel with, flying parallel with the boat, and the deer on the shore scurrying about. She was into all of it. And it didn't hurt that we caught these 3 monster cats. We were with Brad Durick. Brad guides catfishing on the Red and Red Lake River, has a good business for that, and offered his services free of charge for us to put our best foot forward. I think she had a really good time. A lot of the things that back and forth that we talked about seemed quite favorable for her. Again, giving a favorable recommendation to the group and to the governor. That is revealed, who will ultimately get that is revealed at the upcoming fishing opener in the spring of 2020. So that hangs there. Best case scenario, just so our people are well informed, we will be among about a half dozen cities competing for that, even going forward. The application is due in November, and from November until we find out at the fishing opener, about a half dozen cities are in contention for that.
Okay.
To your question of Hockey Day in Minnesota, that is kind of not even in our headlights. It's not even in our radar screen at this time. And we did talk about that yesterday with the whole group, and the real determination there is that for a massive undertaking like this, we can really do only one at a time. So if Hockey Day would ever come, that's like way down the road.
Right.
Nobody's putting a significant amount of effort into it at all. But I can tell you this, Reed Hutton and the East Grand Forks Convention Visitors Bureau and everybody else I know is right on board with this fishing opener. down to Steve Emery, our city engineer, who's helping put together the plans for the redevelopment of the park area down there. And we let her know, I mean, we took her down and toured the area. That will be the launch site, and it is in really kind of disrepair down there right now. Well, we let her know, look at our greenway, it's amazing. From our restaurants to the downtown and the movie theater and the business district that runs, you got to always include like the Highway 2 merchants and all. I mean, it's sure a nice community for doing business and for hospitality. But this little patch of neglect right here, we're going to hope to use the governor's fishing opener opportunity as a kind of a leverage to do these improvements, so that no matter what, whether we get it or not, we're going to be glad that we have put the time and effort into improving that. And she said, this I see commonly. Cities that get the fishing opener, they really do use it as an opportunity to make some improvements and to really kind of freshen things up that they might not have been able to do otherwise. And so we're pretty excited. She's fully on board that we have this little primitive area here with a lot of potential, and sees, yeah, that could be a neat spot, and maybe this event could help you get that done.
Absolutely wonderful to hear. Just so residents, people like hearing these sort of top line numbers. If the governor's fishing opener comes to East Grand Forks, what's the top line, best case scenario economic impact for the area? Ballpark figures perfectly.
We got some of that, and we were just talking about it yesterday, and they said, you know what? It's not so much about that as much as it is really exposing your community as a point of tourism. It would be hard to quantify it. Is it a push that happens in that weekend? Does it ripple out to one summer season of recreation? Does it go, what are we talking here? Because it can be a long-term effect if a community does use it to build some infrastructure, if a community does use it to actually raise the awareness all around the region of what a recreation spot you are. So I wouldn't even put out a number. They put numbers on the screen yesterday, and honestly, the presenter said, don't pay too much attention to that, because the purpose of this is not that. The purpose is a long-term build, and just raising that awareness. But here's the other little bit of good news. I think you guys would know from previous interviews and listening to council meetings, the fiscal agent for this is the Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, or Greater Grand Forks Convention Visitors Bureau. So they take responsibility for the dollar aspect of it. So they become the ones who receive all the donations and sponsorships and whatever else may happen, and also cover the costs. Of course, it's important that the city's on board, and we are, and the Chamber of Commerce will be on board when that time comes. We would just want to get a little closer to see, are we in the running? Are we going to be the city that's selected? And at that point, it's a community-wide, and that's why I love to talk about it right here, right now, and every chance I get. The most recent one, Stephanie Bernstrom of the Greater Grand Forks CVB just came back from the one in Albert Lee, the Minnesota fishing opener. She said, I was blown away by the fact that every single business just bought into this. They were all wearing, they had the plaid, lumberjack plaid stuff on, and little signs and placards, and all of the marquees or whatever were changed over to talk about the fishing opener. It's 100% community buy-in, and it's okay for folks even now to start mentally ramping up for that, businesses and individuals, because it's run by a lot of volunteers, folks that can get energized at the thought of it. So it's good to, I think, even start now to get the buzz going, and again, knowing that we're going to be among about a half dozen cities competing for this.
Do you know who some of the other cities you're competing with are? Or no?
Do not.
Do not? Okay, good to know. Going forward, obviously, Governor's Fishing Opener is the most important thing right now. Are there any...
Oh, but it's not. It's a fun thing.
Most important in terms of fun things between that, Hockey Day Minnesota, and other things. Going forward, are there any other, we'll call them fun things, that the city has maybe even just had preliminary, hey, can we do this type of discussions about? Not the residents should be expecting in the next year, but just so citizens can get kind of a long-term idea of, hey, this may be coming. And this may be coming partnerships with Grand Forks, those sort of things.
You know what I would say to that is, it's unusual for the city to take the lead in a lot of recreation. It's unusual, but we facilitate, I would hope, most all of it, right? So whether it's a parade that wants to come through, and we'll help with, barricading for traffic, or a marathon coming through our community, or whether it's the parade for Heritage Days that leads people to that venue because it's fun, or whether it's the events that take place by Up North Pizza there with the bands and everything, and the city's very involved in helping to reroute traffic. So that would be my encouragement is, and there's a lot of those things happening, and you could check with each individual sponsor, and the Chamber of Commerce would know too. But just know, we are very pro events in this community. We'll try to find every possible way to do it with the most seamless delivery of service. I would hope that our public works and police officers in that moment, they have like a mind toward customer service. How do we make sure this event is as seamless and smooth as it can be, not going exorbitantly on any cost of providing these kinds of services. So I would want the message to be out there. We're very pro all of these kinds of gatherings, and I think if you talk to folks who've done them, they'll say the very same thing. These are good people to work with. Megan is our point of contact in the city that kind of distributes it out. If there's a permitting process, she really helps walk you through it if you're unfamiliar. And that's kind of our role, is to help facilitate these things. And again, there are plenty of them. You were at the council meeting on Tuesday night, the work session of an event that will be coming into the Civic Center. It should be a neat gathering if that's your thing.
The craft beer fest. It was sponsored by Layton, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, just all of that kind of stuff. That's a kind of a narrow market, but plenty of other events would be to a more broad appeal.
Definitely, and that's wonderful to see. At that work session on Tuesday, this will be kind of the last section in this area before I have one more kind of section of questions here. Lefebvre Park, a good discussion was had by the council on Tuesday night about that. What would renovating it mean to the community? Where does it stand for citizens who weren't able to come to the work session or watch the meeting? What should citizens kind of know about where that is?
So that's an area, it's definitely a staging area for boats on and off the river. And if you saw the concept drawings, it showed actually 2 individual boat docking launching areas. And you're going to see, I think, more also like piers where boats could be tied. Maybe the folks want to come and picnic a little bit while their boats are in the water. But the other thing that is, you think of some of the catfishing tournaments, if we have the Governor's Fishing Opener, that whole big area there of Lefebvre Park can be used for community festivals of different kinds. If it, who doesn't want to embrace the waterway right at this time? And as much as we love the campground, we love the business district, which also faces the river, we don't have that larger green space right adjacent to the river, and especially where the river just wraps right around there and the forks. I mean, it's just a neat feature, a neat water feature of our community. And so I think it'll be a location for lots of different kinds of gatherings. So even the Governor's Fishing Opener, there's probably going to be, if we get it, a community fish fry down in there. And we could have, even though the media representation and the immediate ones on the water might be a couple of hundred, we could have over 1,000 people down there on a fish fry for the whole community. So situations like that, I know when they do the catfishing tournaments, they like to invite families and kids just love seeing these monster cats, being brought in and re-released and whatnot. So when we can make that a really neat gathering place along the riverfront, I think it'll get a lot of use, even kinds of use we haven't even thought of.
Absolutely wonderful to hear. Going forward to the last kind of area questions here. At the last full council meeting, Al Huda gave you an award for the city's work with the growing Islamic community here. Can you talk about some of the outreach efforts that the city has had with Al Huda and with its growing growing immigrant base, and are there more things you guys would like to do to help integrate those who come to the area and make everyone feel kind of more welcome and more part of East Grand Forks, that one community concept, basically?
Yeah, I think, if we look at divisions among people groups based upon whether it's skin color or language or other kinds of barriers like religious beliefs, to me those are just arbitrary. And if we let those really crystallize, if we let those become entrenched, we do create a community that is divided. We create a community, and let's face it, that group is largely refugees. And so by the very definition, a refugee had to leave, and sometimes without a lot of advanced preparation. Many of them were not able to bring much with them. And so they came here with a significant amount of need, basically to escape famine and poverty and civil war in their country that they left. So now they've arrived and they've taken refuge here. Now, what shall be our attitude toward them? Should we look at it as, hey, good luck, have a nice day? Or do we, as a host for people who've come here for refuge, can we do better than that? And I would hope that we can do better. And one thing we're not going to do is to create a whole bunch of programs that one little group can utilize and no one else. Because let's face it, you can have poverty across a whole continuum of race, or pick a demographic that you want. Poverty could hit you and me tomorrow. We could come to a point of need and say, hey, I could use a little help here. And so what we do is going to be completely universal. It's going to be humanitarian. We're not looking to start any big like East Grand Forks subsidy program, but it's more of an attitude of, you're in our community, you've come here to live, you're one of us. Now what does that mean? It means we're going to figure out how to talk to one another. That is to say, and maybe you would know, I've worked with DECA in the schools, Soraya Driscoll in the schools, Chad Grassel in the schools. There's been a whole committee, folks from Northland Community Technical College, Cynthia Schaub from Global Friends Coalition, folks from Lutheran Social Services, folks from Polk County, and we've tried to develop kind of a multicultural center that has no religious undertones whatsoever. It is simply folks coming in, particularly if you don't know the language, and by the way, there are folks of various ethnic groups who don't know the language, that is the English language. So to bring them in, teach them the language. Well, why does that matter? Well, you can't fill out a job application if you can't speak the language, and that would include the written language and also basic mathematical skills in English. If you can do those things, you can apply for a job, you can keep a job. More than that, we connect with folks culturally through language, right? And my little joke is, maybe we're both Vikings fans and I don't even know it because we cannot talk about it, right? So I think it's huge for them to really connect with us as a community, for us to connect with them. And also, again, that unity that we're after has to carry with language. So what we've tried to do, and not with city dollars, but just with community support, also again with the school district and everyone else, is to create an area where particularly the adults can come. The kids are well taken care of. They're learning all of these things in the schools. But the adults, many of them are kind of lagging in their language acquisition because they're sort of isolated. And so you'd bring the adults in, they'd get instruction in language, and you'd have a daycare set up because many of them have children and they would need to have some daycare services while the adults are being educated. And again, we're not looking to pour city dollars into this, or the school does not have a budget for this, so the hope is that it could catch on. Let's face it, some of the big employers in the area have huge incentive to grow their employee pool. If there are several hundred people who could be wonderful employees of these companies, if they could learn the language, do you suppose that would help them fill their need for employees? Yeah. So that source of funds is probably the number one that we hoped would materialize, is the big employers who would stand to gain quality workers once they're ready, and they could help to fund this effort to provide education for these adults. So with that in mind, that's kind of the context of now this religious center comes along and says, we would like you to see what we're doing here. We're teaching our children, we're giving them a place to do fun things and not do things that some kids like to get into that maybe aren't so constructive. And so that's really what they're doing at their center. And again, in the spirit of let's say, community unity, I've enjoyed very much getting to know them. They have warm hearts, they have a cooperative spirit, and they want to be friends. They want to be our friends. And guess what? We should all have that same thought right back to them.
Definitely, I 100% agree with you on that one.
Do you disagree on some other ones?
No, I agree with you on all of them, of course, obviously. We, at the Exponent, we were able to cover their open house, and it was absolutely a wonderful experience. Going forward, two more questions to wrap things up here. What's been your relationship with your counterparts on the other side of the river in Grand Forks, and what are some maybe positive fruits that have that relationship has borne for people here in East Grand Forks?
To start with, since I'm mayor, I can start with Mayor Brown. Couldn't ask for a better partner, let's say. Very accessible, given me his office and cell phone numbers, and he actually answers the phone, wherever he might be. Hey, I'm out of town right now. Would you call Pete? And I keep saying, I need a Pete. Pete is very capable. Pete helps organize a lot of what Mayor Brown does. Also writes speeches for Mayor Brown to some extent. Gives him some pretty solid foundational information, which I don't have a Pete. So I'm doing these things. So I have a ton of respect for both of those individuals. Of course, over here we have Megan, and they probably wish they had a Megan, but you're going to have to get over it because Megan is for us. So really, the team, the mayor's office, I think of Mayor Mike and Pete Haga as kind of one single entity. If I need to get access to the mayor's office, those two work hand in glove to provide whatever I need. And if I have an initiative that I would like to see advanced that would require the support of their office along with mine, Pete and Mayor Mike will talk about it. We'll come back together, talk about it. And pretty much across the board, if it's a sensible thing to do, we quietly try to go step by step in that direction. So that part's great. To their city council, like any city council, it's a little charged at times. You have sort of conflicting opinions on the council, but I love that. To have that naysayer here, or that one that gets really excited and can start to move something over there. To the mix of older and younger and more enthusiastic and more reluctant. So it's all an important part of it, so long as we're all listening, of course, to the people who sent us there. It ain't just like the quality of thought in this cranium right here. It really is a commitment to do the people's work in a timely fashion. So to work with their council, you can see some of the little divisions that will always be there, and that the divisions move around depending on the issue. And again, it's all part of the political process. I can work with it very easily. We walked into a joint council meeting of theirs. That was a plan for the South End Neighborhood Bridge, and one or two of their council members had filled the room with folks who didn't prefer to see the bridge at 32nd Avenue. And we had a little heads up of that before the meeting took place, that was going to be happening. And actually it was fun. Several hundred people there, really charged up, and they were kind of opposed to what I would have preferred to see, which again, I respect that. I started my comments by saying, by the way, if anyone was trying to put a bridge, even a nice neighborhood bridge like this, into my neighborhood, I believe I'd be sitting right where you are and saying, really? Really? Are you talking about putting a bridge in my... Really? Convince me that this is important. So to have some level of understanding. Then we're done, and to the individual that helped organize the what was supposed to be kind of an unexpected group, I reached out, I shook his hand, And I said, in a weird sort of way, this whole process is very exhilarating. Okay, and it is, because it's the
Indeed.
people's work with the people's input, hopefully doing the best thing we can for them.
Definitely. One final question to kind of wrap things up here. As mayor, what's been your greatest source of civic pride in East Grand Forks, officially, unofficially, over the past year?
My greatest source of civic pride.
Could be a moment, could be pretty open-ended.
I would say anything where we remember people who gave their lives for us. I think and Memorial Day is fresh in our minds, particularly military folks, and then the loved ones that have left us. And then just before that, earlier in May, I was invited to share the mayoral proclamation. Mayor Brown and I are going to alternate years, and I was invited to share the mayoral proclamation at the Peace Officer Memorial Service. And there we had representatives from, of course, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks Police Departments, Grand Forks County, Polk County, Marshall County, other counties nearby. And then to the state, we had the troopers there. We had the federal there with Homeland Security and probably the DNR have lost people. And then on into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had a contingent there. And they name off each individual from all the way back to like late 1800s, early 1900s who gave their lives in service as a peace officer. And A, those are incredibly moving times. B, really important, because if someone makes that supreme sacrifice for you, for me, they need to be remembered as the heroic individuals that they are. And again, I'd put that right out to all of our Memorial Day observances. I'll never forget being at one of these, and none of us likes to pay taxes. We get a little crabby at tax time, we're paying taxes. When I go to this memorial service and think of these dear souls who gave their lives, and I think honestly in my mind, you grumble about throwing a few coins in the bucket, and they gave their lives. And I say, shut your mouth. Pay your tax, and be grateful for those who've given so much more than that. So that right there for me is, and it's not even about specifically mayor stuff, but to the heart, that's what moves me, is that sort of thing.
Definitely, 100% agree with you on that. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming down here to speak with us.